Hi everyone, welcome to our hashtag Save Student Speech Teach-In. We're so excited to have you all here. We're gonna give it just another minute so everybody can roll in on all of their beautiful different platforms, but thank you so much for being here today. Okay, awesome. So let's just go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Tabitha Escalante. I'm a Judicial Advocacy Associate at March for Our Lives, and I'm so excited to be here today on behalf of all of the student organizers who are here along. Oops, sorry, I think I was muted. Yeah, so on behalf of all of the student organizers who are here today, I just would like to welcome all of you to tonight's hashtag Save Student Speech Teach-In. We have a really special program for everyone. So tonight, we're joined by an incredible lineup of student activists, legal advocates, scholars, and a true icon in the free speech fight, Mary Beth Tinker herself, all of whom we'll have a chance to hear from very soon. So to give you a little bit of background on who we are and why we're here today, this event has been an ongoing collaboration between Student Voice, the Kentucky Student Voice Team, Houston Independent School District Student Congress, and March for Our Lives. We're four grassroots student-led orgs working to empower students and amplify their voices at the national, state, and local levels through grassroots organizing, research, storytelling, and policy. So today we're here to raise awareness about the landmark student free speech case that's going to be heard in the Supreme Court this Wednesday, 2 days from now, Mahanoy Area School District versus BL. This is the first student free speech case that's been heard in the court for more than 50 years, which means that this ruling is going to be generation defining, no matter how you put it. And since the court's most recent ruling on student speech in public schools was Tinker v. Des Moines in 1969, students have since enjoyed off-campus First Amendment protections to hold rallies, testify at school boards, and lobby on legislation, all of this free from punishment from their schools. However, this upcoming case has the potential to roll back all of these rights and authorize school districts to regulate any speech that occurs off campus or on social media if the school district deems it disruptive. And as student organizers, we know that giving school administrators the power to punish us for social media posts, for criticizing unjust rules, speaking to our school boards, or even holding sit-ins, that power could debilitate student activism. Online and off-campus expression are critical to advancing justice in our schools and in our communities. So it's vital that we continue to amplify the stakes of this case and the voices of young people who've been at the front lines of so many incredible movements in recent history. So in order to defend our constitutional right to organize, our wonderful coalition of student groups filed an amicus brief in the Supreme Court to articulate the dangers of limiting authentic student expression. And today we're welcoming student representatives from all of our great, beautiful orgs to share their perspectives on this case with us tonight. This is obviously only the start of the conversation. For everybody watching at home right now, we hope you'll engage with us using the chat function on your respective streaming platforms and through the hashtag Save Student Speech. Please feel free to ask us any questions you might have, and toward the end of the program, we'll take time for Q&A and direct those toward the appropriate party. We'd love for you to engage with us, so please do. Again, thanks for tuning in. Your presence is so powerful. We really feel you all out there rooting for this case, and we're really truly here for history in the making, which is a beautiful thing. So now I have the pleasure of turning it over to our first guest, Sarah Rose, senior counsel at ACLU Pennsylvania, who actually argued this case in the Court of Appeals. So it's wonderful to have her with us today. And she's going to give us some legal context and background to the case. So welcome, Sarah. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Tabitha. So yeah, I'm one of the lawyers who is representing the student cheerleader in this case. Her name is Brandy Levy. She's known as BL because she was only 14 when we filed this case, and the court where we filed it has a rule that minors have to be known by their initials, but we can feel free to call her Brandy today. This case is really near and dear to my heart because I was a student journalist in high school and college, and actually my first job out of college was working for the Student Press Law Center, which then caused me to make the decision to go to law school. And when I was working at the Student Press Law Center, a lot of the cases that were happening then were the very early cases of student internet speech. And the question about whether schools have authority to punish kids for what they say outside of school was very new then. And as you can see, it's only now, that was a while ago that I worked there, it's only now that it's gotten up to the US Supreme Court, but there's been a lot of confusion among schools, among students, and among the courts about whether schools can punish kids for off-campus speech if it causes a disruption at school. And that's the question that is teed up before the US Supreme Court that's going to be argued on Wednesday. So my client, Brandy, she was 14. She was a freshman in high school. She had just completed tryouts. She'd been on the JV cheerleading team and had just completed tryouts for her sophomore year. She found out she didn't make the varsity team, that she would be on JV again for another year. And a couple of days later, she and her friend were at just a local convenience store in her very small town in Pennsylvania. And, honestly, she doesn't even remember what was going through her head back then when you ask her now, but she just posted a snap with it said F school, F softball, F cheer, F everything, and it had a picture of her and her friend with their middle fingers up. And she put on her Snapchat story, which for those of you familiar with Snapchat, stays up for about 24 hours, and anybody who's one of your Snapchat friends can view it if they choose to. And she had about 250 Snapchat friends. We don't know how many people saw it, but we know one person saw it, took a screenshot of it, and then showed it to another student who wasn't one of Brandy's friends. And that student happened to be the daughter of one of the cheerleading coaches. And so that's how the cheerleading coaches found out about the snap, and they decided that it violated their rule against using profanity in connection with the word cheer, and they suspended her from the team for an entire year. She found out about it. She was called into the cheerleading coach's classroom. She said she was just devastated. She was crying. She called her parents. Her parents tried to get the school district to change its decision because they understood how this was a fleeting expression of frustration. She didn't intend to hurt anyone by saying it. She did it outside of school, and they felt like it was unfair for the school to punish her for that. The school refused to back down. That's when the parents contacted the ACLU, and we got involved and represented Brandy. So we first filed this in 2017, and now it's 2021, and it's going up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And I can guarantee you that no one at the ACLU of Pennsylvania thought this case was going to make it up to the U.S. Supreme Court, because we actually won every step of the way. There have been 4 court decisions in Brandy's favor already, none in the school district's favor. But it's a really important issue that's going up before the court because it has it could impact the rights of 50 million kids across this country who attend public schools. Right now, some of the courts have said schools can punish kids for off-campus speech that caused the disruption at school. And the Third Circuit, which is the court that heard this case, and where the case is being appealed from, was the first court in the country to say no, schools cannot punish kids for off-campus speech simply because it caused the disruption in school. Now, they said there might be other First Amendment standards that would allow schools to punish kids for speech that rises to the level of threats or harassment or bullying. But for speech like Brandy's, which was really just a fleeting expression of frustration made on a weekend outside of school at a convenience store in her town, they said schools don't have the authority to punish that. The government couldn't punish an adult under that same standard. So why should schools be able to do that? And we'll find out by the end of June what the answer to that question is.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that experience with us and where the case has been at this point. I'm just curious, how do you think this case is going to turn out from your perspective?
I think that it's hard to predict. Obviously, I hope that the court affirms the Third Circuit, which would mean that schools don't have the ability to punish kids for off-campus speech. You know, we have, in addition to you know, the student activists on this call, we've had, you know, a huge number of groups from across the ideological spectrum supporting Brandy, which shows that, you know, there's a lot of people that care about free speech and think that, you know, schools shouldn't be able to punish kids for what they say. I mean, not just because kids have a lot of important things to say, but think about the lesson that that teaches to kids, right? We want to teach, you know, young people that the First Amendment is important, that the free speech is important, and the reasons why we protect it in this country, and not the lesson that the government can punish you simply because other people are offended by what you say, which is really what the issue is here. Because when you speak outside of school, the only way that it can disrupt school is if other people in the school are upset by what you say, right? It's not a situation where, you know, you're handing out flyers in a disruptive manner, right? Because you're doing it outside of school. So the only way it affects school is if the listeners object to what you say. And I think it's a really dangerous thing to tell young people that that the government can censor that kind of speech.
We definitely agree, and I know that as institutions of learning really being the first space that students are able to be civically engaged, it's really disheartening to see school districts trying to deter us from actually being civically engaged and putting that education into action. But thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time to frame this case for all of our students, and thank you so much for all of the incredible work that you and the ACLU Pennsylvania team have done to defend student speech.
Thanks.
Awesome. So now we have the pleasure of hearing from 4 student leaders from our different organizations who are all here to share the stories of their own advocacy and their perspectives on the consequences of rolling back students' rights to off-campus and online free speech. So while these students may only represent a handful of those who have led youth movements that have demanded progress from all over this country, we really hope that their stories will help illuminate what's at stake here. So first, we're going to be hearing from a representative of the Kentucky Student Voice team. Anna, thank you so much for being here. Please feel free to take it away.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Anna Despa, and I'm a member of the Kentucky Student Voice team. Our team envisions a commonwealth where legislators co-design education policies with young people. A commonwealth where education research is democratized, informing action for justice for the very people our schools are supposed to serve, students. Back in 2016, we surveyed superintendents, principals, and school-based decision-making council coordinators, asking if they would support the addition of a student member to their district's Board of Education or school-based decision-making council. And about 50% told us they would in fact not support one. Since we documented these disagreements with school administrators, Student Voice in Kentucky has come a long way, thanks to our rapidly expanding team of students. Though our work has sometimes put us at odds with our principals and superintendents, like when we pushed back against the introduction of hard security measures over the investment in school mental health professionals, we have counted both grassroots and grasstops victories along the way. Because of our out-of-school advocacy and use of social media as an organizing tool, Kentucky's education system is on the path for meaningful and equitable student voice. In fact, our State Board of Education now has a student seat written into law, thanks in large part to a campaign we launched on social media called Save Our Seats. As we continue our advocacy for meaningful student voice in other school governance structures, and as we use our social media platforms that are independent of schools to sometimes critique them, we fear a ruling in favor of Mahanoy would enable administrators to quash student dissent when young people like us express a desire for change. And our experience leads us to believe that such a ruling would silence and undermine the efforts of young activists working to build the equitable and just schools and democracy we deserve.
Absolutely, Anna. Thank you so much for sharing. We know that Kentucky SVT has been doing some incredible work to uplift students across your state and also ensure that they, not only have a seat at the table, but that they're actively leading and that their voices are being heard. So we really appreciate you and SVT for being here and being part of this coalition. Now we're going to be turning to Michelle, a student from Houston Independent School District Student Congress.
Good evening, guys. Sorry that my camera isn't working, but My name is Michelle Leon. I am a freshman at Bel Air High School in Houston, Texas, and a part of the leadership team of the Houston ISD Student Congress. Founded in 2014, we are the oldest and most prominent student voice group in Texas. We represent the 215,000 students of Houston ISD and advocate for educational justice across our city and state. For example, in 2015, we filed a student-written amicus brief in the Texas Supreme Court on a school finance and inequality case. Now we're taking our voices to the Supreme Court of the United States on student free speech. Last year, we surveyed more than 3,000 students about whether schools should reopen during the coronavirus. The school district didn't survey any students, so we did it on our own. The district then started spamming us over a weekend, trying to get us to stop talking to the press about how students felt. Then, just 2 months ago, Houston ISD tried to dissolve their relationship with us. They smeared our student activist organization to make us look bad and to end our voice. The district wanted to control what students said about HISD so that they could look like the best district. They tried to paint us as rebellious just because we are student-led and we speak the truth. They wanted to shut us down instead of lifting us up. But we didn't let the district take away our free speech. Instead, we organized students and rallied the public to stand up for student voices. We used social media to advocate and spread the word of how important it was to have students speak up. We expressed our passion on social media. I remember the way I felt when I attended my first board meeting to let the board know how I felt. I felt like my student voice was on the line when my own district didn't support us. They wanted us to go down, but that would not happen. The school board voted to table the proposal. In the meantime, we've continued to be loud and to advocate for the voices of the 215,000 students of our community. Student speech is very important, and we will continue to fight for educational justice in our communities. We will continue to have our voice heard. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Michelle. As we all know, no group of people is better positioned to share the inner workings of a school than its students. And HISD has clearly harnessed the power of social media to voice their concerns, which is such an incredibly powerful and necessary thing in this day and age. So we really appreciate you for being here. Next, I have the pleasure of introducing another beautiful student speaker, Travis from March for Our Lives, and also from my team. Welcome, Travis. It's so great to have you here.
Thanks so much, Tabitha. I appreciate it. Yeah, like Tabitha mentioned, hi everyone. My name's Travis Harper. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and like Tabitha mentioned, I'm at March for Our Lives. I organize with March for Our Lives, and I'm a judicial advocacy associate. Now, back in 2018, thousands of young people across the country were deeply shaken by a shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School on Valentine's Day of 2018. I was one of those students. And as a junior at the time, I really was looking for an outlet to make my voice heard. I was so frustrated by year after year, shooting after shooting of violence in schools that not only I thought it affected my safety, felt like no one was listening to me. So I wanted to communicate my anger and frustration to our country's political leaders. So, like any young person, talked to my classmates who felt the exact same way, and we started to plan a walkout and march in support of gun violence prevention. And word got out, and teachers and administrators throughout the school became aware of our plans. And importantly, they expressed their disapproval of them. But, we said our voices were going to be heard regardless. And believing in the urgent need for gun violence prevention, we attempted to go forward with the walkout anyway. On March 14th, 2018, as we tried to walk out, the school's administration locked the doors, physically stopping us from exiting the building and using our voices. But the fact of the matter is, we weren't deterred at all. We were determined to organize despite our school's attempts to silence us. We quickly adjusted our plan. Instead of walking out of school during school hours, we would march after school in the surrounding neighborhood. Now, while we relied on word of mouth in person to get the word out, most students heard about the march after school over social media. We posted on Instagram and Snapchat stories, Facebook stories, telling everyone the new time and location of the march and urging classmates to join, even if they weren't planning on joining the original walkout that was going to happen during school. Thanks to the power of social media as an organizing tool, our after-school march was a huge success and sent a clear message to our local, state, and national officials that enough was enough. But I worry what could have happened if the school district's proposed rule in this case were in place. Now, our school was able to crush our protests on school grounds, but what would the outcome have been if they could have done the same for our off campus protests? They could have disciplined us for posting on our Snapchat stories and on our Instagram stories. If my school was able to discipline students for off campus speech, I honestly don't even know if the protests could have happened or if our voices could have been heard. And for the sake of all future student protests and good trouble, I hope that the court protects student free speech. Thank you.
Travis, thank you so much for sharing that. I know that there are so many kids across the country, especially in 2018 during the original march, who experienced a lot of administrative pushback and suppression for trying to organize their own walkouts. And I know that whether we're out here marching for gun violence prevention, getting police out of our schools, climate justice, racial justice, anything you can think of, we have the right to be loud. We have the right to be heard as students. And I think that's super necessary. And it's great that you brought the perspective of what would happen if schools are able to punish off-campus speech. We really do need to be thinking about that. So I want to thank you for being here. And now to round out the student perspectives and stories, we have Gabriella from Student Voice. Welcome, Gabriella.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gabriella Stakova. I'm a senior at Paul Laurence Dunbar High School in Lexington, Kentucky, and I'm the Storytelling Programs Coordinator at Student Voice. In my sophomore year, our district added metal detectors to every high school, and my school received them first. My friends and I heard students anxiously discussing the policies, so we worked with the administration to create a survey and received responses from over a quarter of the student body. But my principal didn't like our findings about students' thoughts on metal detectors. When we presented them at a meeting, she told us the information was wrong and biased, despite supporting the survey before and during distribution. It was clear from her response that she only wanted to hear positive results. But as the legislature considered adding metal detectors statewide, my friends and I understood the importance of the data, so we testified about it to a legislative working group. When my principal found out, she called me and my friends out of class, berated us for sharing the data publicly, and urged us to keep quiet. Although we weren't formally disciplined, I'm terrified of what could have been if my administration could punish students for out-of-school speech. Students like me are on the ground and connected to our classmates. We hear our peers' concerns and problems, and we're best positioned to share awareness about these issues outside of the student body, whether that's through advocacy or journalism. Would my friends and I have received the same response if our results painted the school in a positive light? I don't think so. If the Supreme Court rules in support of the Mahanoy Area School District, I'm afraid we'll see students become an echo chamber, allowing students to share only positive information while silencing anything negative. We must protect student activists and the crucial role they serve as connectors between school policy and the outside world, which is why it is so important for the Supreme Court to rule in favor of Brandy Levy.
Absolutely, Gabriella. Thank you so much for sharing. I think you and Michelle have touched on an incredibly important point, and that is that giving school districts the power to silence narratives that don't paint them in a favorable light is very dangerous. And as we've heard from all of our different students, a huge concern is that ruling in favor of the school district will embolden administrators to target speech that they just don't like or don't agree with. And when you do that, that's kind of a slippery slope. Where does it end? Does it end at religious views, political views? Are there things that are going to be silenced just because they're unpopular? Very concerning overall. And given that, as I said before, given that schools are often the first civic institutions that many of us are exposed to, there's no excuse for administrators to undermine our attempts to be engaged citizens and push for action or share our different views on all of these things. That's kind of counterintuitive. So I want to thank again all of our student representatives. Now we want to turn to Frank Lamont, the former executive director of the Student Press Law Center, who wears so many different hats: attorney, professor, fierce advocate for free press. Frank, thank you for being here. We'd love if you could give the students and educators who are watching right now a Supreme Court explainer of sorts, a typical timeline, and share a little bit about what the amicus brief process looks like, or what amicus briefs are, I guess.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for the invitation. I appreciate it. Looks like my video is disabled here, but I'll keep talking. There we go. Now it's enabled. Okay, awesome. Great to join you. And especially great to share this platform with my personal hero, Mary Beth Taker, who is such a national treasure. You're so fortunate to have a few minutes to hear from her tonight. So I'll be quick to get to the good stuff. I also appreciate these 4 organizations signing on to an amicus brief at the Supreme Court. I'm just going to put the law professor hat on for a minute and give you a little bit of an idea of how this case got in front of the Supreme Court and why the stakes are so high. So this case got to the court by way of an appeal from a regional court of appeals, the Third Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals. And as Sarah Rose explained to you, the Levy family has been winning the case at every stage. They've won it at the U.S. District Court level. They won it at the regional level at the Circuit Court of Appeals. So it has been the school district asking the higher courts to take the case and overturn it each time. Same thing here. The school district petitioned the Supreme Court to take the case. And anybody who follows the court knows they only take literally less than 1% of the petitions that are filed there. And so it's quite an accomplishment to get a case taken by the court. It takes 4 of the 9 justices to vote to hear a case. So not enough to actually win the case, not enough to decide the case. But we know that at least 4 out of the 9 justices were intrigued enough by the case that they wanted to hear it. And these types of disputes involving off-campus student speech and schools' regulatory authority have been coming before the federal courts ever since social media was invented. And judges have been asking the Supreme Court over and over again, please give us some guidance, please give us some clarity. And it's remarkable that finally the court has decided that this case will be the vehicle for doing that. As Sarah Rose explained, I guess there's a little bit of a reason to be anxious or concerned that the justices decided this was the case they wanted to hear, because this was one of the rare cases where the student actually won and the school district actually lost. Some people suspect that when the court takes a case like this, they intend to overturn it. They intend to reverse or to modify it. So that's one school of thought. But I'm a glass half full guy. I'm an optimist. And so I tend to think that the reason that they like this case is because the speech that Brandy Levy was punished for was so far short of what would be regarded as disruptive speech under the Supreme Court's Tinker precedent. In fact, it's nowhere near disruptive speech. It just caused one student to complain and a little bit of chatter inside of the locker room. And I think that ideally should be front and center in what the justices are thinking. They should be thinking about this as a case that would lower the threshold for punishing speech to the point where one offended person could silence everybody else from being heard. Just to explain real quick about the importance of these amicus briefs and why it's so valuable that these 4 organizations did weigh in. 24 amicus briefs were filed at the Supreme Court in support of the Levy family. It's a remarkably broad showing of support. In addition to your brief, there were briefs on behalf of college athletes, on behalf of Christian organizations, on behalf of parents' organizations, on behalf of both very conservative and very liberal organizations. So there is a real consensus here that we need to carefully confine the authority of schools, which after all are government agencies, to get into the business of punishing people for what they say, especially when you look at what Brandy Levy was really doing here. She was doing 2 things. She was complaining about a school policy decision. She was expressing her dissatisfaction with the decision made by government employees. And she was also just venting her frustration with the stresses in her life. And imagine if that's going to be the approach that schools take from now on. That if you vent your frustration with the stresses that you're feeling in your life, you're now committing a punishable disciplinary infraction because that somehow makes the school look bad. We need to be offering a hand of help to people like Brandy Levy and not a fist of punishment. So that's why this case is so important.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Frank. We really, really appreciate it. And I know that it's been such a pleasure to have you here and that so many of the students in the coalition have sincerely appreciated all of the guidance that you've offered to us throughout this process. And I'd like to remind everybody that's watching right now that we will be holding a Q&A, and Frank has been kind enough to offer his time to stick around and answer any questions that people might have. So for folks tuning in right now, please don't hesitate to drop any questions for us or for Frank, and we will direct those his his way. And now, before we turn to our special guest for the night, we'd like to welcome two students to share a little bit about our own participation in the amicus brief process and how we've decided to throw our 2 cents onto that Supreme Court stage. So now I'm going to turn it over to Connor and Athena.
Hi everyone, so my name is Athena Hawk. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a sophomore at the Kinder High School for the Performing and Visual Arts in Houston, Texas, and I'm on the leadership team of the HISD Student Congress.
Hey everyone, Connor Flick, he, him. I'm a junior at the Gowan Academy in Kentucky. I'm a researcher and student leader within the Kentucky Student Voice team.
So understanding more about the Supreme Court and the role of amicus briefs, we want to explain how we got involved with our own brief, the process of creating it, and how we are where we are today.
So what we did first is that we got started with each of our organizations connecting with the ACLU over this case. We all knew that this case would be incredibly impactful on the world of student voice, as the moments in speech used outside of schools suddenly were being open to being monitored and punished by our schools. On top of that, it became so clear that school regulation in particular was going to threaten student activism, threatening the life of all these student organizations that are on this call today. This case was on all of our radars, and the ACLU helped to join us together and join forces to drive action over the potential injustices that we are trying to prevent here today.
So to learn more about the case, together we were able to educate ourselves, and we learned from each other about the legal process, the context of the case, and the history of student free speech. During this time, we were able to get in contact with the wonderful attorneys at Greenberg Traurig and set up a meeting to pursue formal legal action and give our input of what we wanted to see in an amicus brief.
Speaking more to the meeting was an incredible experience from connecting with the Supreme Court attorneys at Greenberg Traurig and sharing our personal experiences like we're doing today regarding student voice censorship and the repression of student activism in our schools. The attorneys carefully and thoughtfully listened to our stories and concerns and ended up including many of them in that amicus brief. Our voices as students were truly heard in that meeting, representing the world in voice and activism that our teams helped to move forward for every student and all students, while combating the danger that this case poses to that exact model like we were expressing today and within that meeting. That meeting not only represented our student voice, but demonstrated how important it is in standing up and speaking truth to power.
So a few days after the meeting, each of our teams received a draft of the brief. We were able to go through the entire draft and make specific line-by-line edits and include our stories from all of our teams, ensuring that authentic student experiences were expressed exactly how we wanted them to be represented to the court. At each step in the process, our groups were able to author, edit, and give input on how we wanted the court to understand our stance on the case. We made it clear through our own lived experience that overturning the Third Circuit's ruling in this case would be devastating to the work that we do every day.
To our knowledge, this is the first time that high school student organizations like ours have ever submitted an amicus brief to the U.S. Supreme Court to advocate on behalf of student rights. To be clear, we find it deeply unfortunate and even abhorrent that student free speech rights have been threatened to this point where we feel that intervention by student organizations is so necessary today. In a perfect world, this brief and this meeting and everything we've done so far would not need to happen and we would not be here today. However, we also recognize that this moment is so important in the history of student advocacy and student voice, and we're honored to be a part of it. Getting to exercise student voice on this level has been an amazing and exceptional experience, but we also hope to pave the way so that way this isn't exceptional in the future. We hope that this case and our efforts help move the world of student voice forward instead of regress it, and encourage students to further exercise their First Amendment rights, whether that's inside of school or outside of school. Thank you.
Thank you both so much for walking us through that incredibly exciting process. It's so powerful to have young people sharing their voice at this level. And you're absolutely right. I wish it didn't have to happen. And I hope that we don't set a standard for it happening in the future, but we really appreciate that we were able to be involved in this process. And like you said, history is being made right before our eyes, and it's wonderful to be a part of it, but it's tough not knowing what the outcome will be and being uncertain about whether or not the court's actually going to defend our rights. But we're still hopeful, and that's why we're here today, really talking about this and trying to share information with as many people as possible. So thank you both for sharing. We really appreciate it. And now we'd like to turn to tonight's special guest, who has experience waiting around in her own court case. She was a teenager when her own First Amendment case was taken to the Supreme Court, and now, more than 50 years later, she's still a powerhouse out here fighting alongside students for their free speech rights. We're so delighted to welcome Mary Beth Tinker to speak today. Thanks for being here, Mary Beth.
Thank you so much, Tabitha, and thank you to all of you for setting up this program and for what each and every one of you is doing to advocate for youth voices, your own, and for the others on the call, like Frank Lamonte and Sarah Rose, for advocating for the voices of youth, because you know that youth are so important to the progress of our society and to the progress of our world. So not only is it important for the well-being of you as young people to speak up and express yourselves, and it was important for Brandy to do that for her well-being. And she used a commonly used expression of our culture, and she expressed her feelings, and she should have every right to do that. So it's important for all of you to express your feelings about the issues, the policies of our time that you are affected by. And you are affected by these policies in a detrimental way too often. Travis talked about gun violence. You know, youth are very much affected by that. And so you have to be part of the solution to improve the policies that affect you so much and that have had such a detrimental effect on you. I mean, metal detectors in schools or being on the school board. Kentucky, you're just doing such a great job. And Houston, I just think it's wonderful that you've done all of this work and you've filed an amicus in this case. But it's just, it's so, young people are a group that through history in our country and really in the world have been discriminated against and have not been treated with the utmost respect that you should be treated with. You haven't been a priority. You can just look at various health indicators. You have to breathe polluted air too often, drink polluted water, are the most likely age group to live in poverty, school budgets getting cut, living under the war economy, where there are other priorities and some people are making a lot of money off of those priorities. And so it's fitting that young people should be the ones to speak up for yourselves. Yes, adults can speak for you and can advocate for you, but when you speak for yourselves, it's so powerful. So I'm glad that you are. And this case is an important case. There 50 years ago, it was the Tinker ruling in 1969, a little over 50 years. There have been 3 other cases at the Supreme Court having to do with students' free speech rights. Bethel versus Frazier in 1986, which had to do with obscenity in school, and the students lost that case. Wasn't really obscene, but regardless. And then the most damaging was Hazelwood versus Kuhlmeyer, which had to do with school-sponsored speech. However, students in 13 states have succeeded in getting legislation to overcome the ruling in Hazelwood and to protect student journalists instead. And that's called the New Voices Campaign, which is a project of the Student Press Law Center. I think Illinois and Vermont and Washington State were the latest states to win those campaigns. And then the last case was the Bong Hits for Jesus case, Morris v. Frederick, which was in 2007, when the court ruled that students cannot advocate for illegal drugs in school. But it's true that in 50 years, this case that's coming up, Mahanoy versus BL, will have such a huge impact. And because it has to do with your out of school speech. And it's just really an extension of the control of administrators over students' lives, students' expression. And a lot of administrators don't want that, which is why there have been a number of amicus briefs by educators in favor of Brandy also. But I'm so glad that you all have filed your amicus brief and that you are speaking up and using your rights to improve conditions, not only for yourselves, but for all youth across the country. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary Beth. We would love if you would take this time to maybe outline a little bit about your own experience with student speech throughout the history of your case, and also why you chose to get involved in this one. Why did your family choose to submit an amicus brief here? Why is this the case over the past 50 years that's so important?
Yes. Well, I got involved. It's really a group story. There was a group of students, just like Student Voice, but we were smaller and we were only in Des Moines, Iowa. It grew out of sort of church groups in Des Moines that we were involved with. And so we were really, I was inspired by what I call the Black Lives Matter of our time, which was the Birmingham Children's Crusade in 1963. 2,000 African-American children and teenagers rallied against white supremacy and in favor of racial justice. And to punish them, the white supremacists, the Ku Klux Klan and others, bombed their headquarters, which was their church, the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, on September 15th, 1963. So the writer James Baldwin and a leader in the civil rights movement named Bayard Rustin, you may not have heard of. He was a wonderful, amazing man who was also gay. But they put out a call for people to wear black armbands to mourn for the 4 little girls that were killed in the church in the bombing that September of 1963. And so we wore black armbands in Des Moines, and there were memorial services around the country. And that was our first experience with expressing ourselves as far as our grief, really. And there are plenty of feelings that young people are having these days to express. And so it's important. But then so much else was happening in those mighty times that are so much like now. And by 1964, then again, so much of your rights in public schools are based on the actions of Black students speaking up against racism. In 1964, students in Mississippi at a Black school, also high school, they wore buttons to school to protest the murder by white supremacists again of 3 civil rights workers, James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Mickey Schwerner. And those students were told they could not wear those buttons to school. It was 1964. And they went on to win their case, though, at the appeals level for Mississippi in 1966. Why? Because the judges said that they had not substantially disrupted school. And so that standard then would be carried into the Tinker rule. I didn't know about all of that, but our young lawyer from the American Civil Liberties Union knew about all that. When we wore black armbands then in 1965 to mourn the Vietnam War dead, we were told we could not do that. And 5 students were suspended for doing that. And the American Civil Liberties Union took that case, and we lost. Unlike Brandy, we lost at the district level, and we lost at the appeals level, and then it was appealed to the Supreme Court, which takes very few cases. But Brandy's been very lucky to have great lawyers like Sarah Rose and Vic Walczak and the entire Pennsylvania ACLU team. So when we finally won, though, at the Supreme Court in 1969, it was 7-2. It was a very strong ruling. And one of my favorite parts of the ruling is that students are persons under our Constitution with the rights and responsibilities of persons. And they said there's 2 things students cannot do with their free speech rights. Number 1, substantially disrupt school. And for that, they cited the Mississippi high school students case called Burnside. And the other thing that they said students could not do was to impinge on the rights of others, whatever that means. And that's been debated ever since. But since 2007, there has not been a ruling at the Supreme Court about student speech. There are other cases having to do with students' rights. In 1973, the Supreme Court ruled that you do not have a right to equal education. in the United States. That was called Rodriguez, that case. The Supreme Court has also ruled that it's okay to paddle kids in public schools. That was called Ingram. The Supreme Court has ruled that you cannot strip search students in public schools. That was Savannah Redding, the case where they strip searched her in Arizona. She was in 8th grade. So there are other cases at the Supreme Court, but this case that's going to be heard on Wednesday has to do with the First Amendment and free speech rights of students.
Thank you so much for sharing all of this wonderful wisdom with us. We really, really appreciate it. And now I think we want to turn to a little bit of a Q&A session. So folks watching, please feel free to drop any questions in the chat that you have for Mary Beth, Frank, Sarah, or any of our student leaders, and we'd be more than happy to take them. So all of our lovely teammates are scrolling through the chats right now to see if we have any. Okay, great. So we have our first question. This is for students. So any of our students, please feel free to come on and share your perspective. Can you share a little bit more about how you've used social media in your organizing and storytelling, and why is it so important that online speech is protected? Anybody willing to share, please feel free. I'd love to point this to any of our student journalists. Gabriella, go ahead.
Yeah, I can speak a bit to that. So in regards to student journalism, in particular at Student Voice, I touched on this a bit earlier, but I'm the storytelling programs coordinator, which means that I manage our journalism fellowship and its alumni program, the Press Corps. And I think in terms of the way that we use social media for storytelling and for organizing, it's a really crucial platform for us to be able to amplify the writing that our fellows are doing on the Student Voice website, and really to be able to engage a broader community of people who, might not be the sorts of students who are subscribing to newsletters or looking at different medias, but are easily accessible on platforms like Instagram or Twitter. And so I think to that degree, social media is really central to being able to reach people of my age and of our age, and to be able to organize effectively, especially when it comes to projects that are national or even at a state level and scale.
Incredible. Thank you so much for sharing. And we definitely agree. Obviously, the entire landscape of storytelling and organizing would be fundamentally different if the school district were to prevail in this case. And it's so important that online speech is protected, because we've harnessed that power for so many different reasons, whether that be sharing injustice that's occurring within our schools, using social media to organize around different issues, connect with people that are passionate about the same causes as us, and just share our ideas and educate others. I think that's so important. So thank you so much for sharing that perspective. We have another question here for Frank or Sarah. Please, either of you, please feel free to give any insights that you have. Have First Amendment rulings typically fallen along partisan lines, or is it more of a case-by-case basis? And what do you think we can expect there, if anything? I know it's really up in the air.
I'll give it a try. So the answer is, honestly, the First Amendment is one of those things that jumps party and ideological lines. If you look at, especially since Chief Justice John Roberts became the Chief Justice at the Supreme Court, the court has been overwhelmingly and at times unanimously supportive of First Amendment rights in all sorts of contexts. In fact, schools are one of the only times, you heard Mary Beth mention the 2007 Morse case. Schools are one of the only times when the Supreme Court seems to have a little bit of a First Amendment blind spot, but otherwise the court has been overwhelmingly in favor of First Amendment rights, even frankly, when the speech is really low value, when it's really offensive, when it makes a very minimal contribution to the discussion of any type of social or political issue. They've always recognized that the First Amendment requires a lot of breathing space for the speaker, and that we need to confine the authority of government to punish whistleblowing speech. And so I don't really think, actually, if you look at the history of some of the justices on the court, who we haven't heard from since 2007, because there's been so much turnover since 2007, Justice Gorsuch, for instance, is new to the court since the Morse case. And he authored a very powerful pro-student rights opinion right before leaving the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals in the case involving the criminalization of a really minor act of disciplinary misconduct at school. And he wrote a really resounding defense of the First Amendment in that case. Unfortunately, he was on the wrong end of a 2-to-1 vote. So yeah, I'm not at all pessimistic about the lineup of the court, and I would not read very much into the partisan or ideological alignment.
Thank you so much. That's really great to hear. And I think, as you were saying, the spectrum of all of the different people that have really shown up for this case, whether it be through amicus briefs, talking about it in the media, talking about it online, and the people that are here right now, we've brought together such a beautiful, broad sweeping coalition of people that are involved in so many different areas of activism, or people that don't necessarily show up. I think that's really incredible, and just goes to show how important First Amendment issues are for everybody, and how everybody's been able to recognize that regardless of partisanship. So another question that we have for Mary Beth. Mary Beth, what do you see as the similarities between this case and your own, since it's been regarded as the 21st century tinker? If you have any insights on if there are similarities, or if you don't think so.
Yes, they are both youth rights cases, and this is an international human rights issue, the rights of young people. So we were expressing our feelings about war, and we were calling for a Christmas truce in the Vietnam War in 1965 in December, when we wore the black armband. We wore black armbands to school to mourn for the dead in Vietnam. And we were expressing our feelings about it, just as Brandy was expressing her feelings about, what's going on in her life. And that's very important. I'm a nurse, and I've spent my life working with teenagers and children and youth, and really all ages also. But I have seen firsthand how it's good for your health, students and youth, when you express yourselves about the issues that affect your life. And right now, there's a lot of talk about mental health among teenagers. Everyone wants to, get some mental health workers in the schools if possible, which is fine. It's a fine idea, but we can also prevent mental health problems and help you young people to thrive by encouraging you to express your feelings. And that's what Brandy was doing. So that's the similarity: youth expressing their feelings about issues that are affecting our lives, your lives.
Amazing, thank you. Another question that we have, I think this could be answered by anyone, but I'd love to pass it off to one of our students if possible. I know that there have been a lot of concerns about cyberbullying and how free speech plays into that, and I think that's been a narrative that's really been pushed by the school board. So do any of our student activists have a response to that? How are we responding to concerns of cyberbullying? Oh, and I see Travis has turned his camera on. Go ahead.
Thanks, Tabitha. Yeah, I think that's a really important question, because I don't think anyone here would say that schools shouldn't be able to punish speech that may be harassment or bullying that's genuinely harmful to other students. But the question in this case isn't about whether or not schools should be able to discipline students for cyberbullying in particular or harassment. The question is whether or not we should give schools leeway to punish any speech that they deem disruptive whatsoever. It's about giving schools too much of a leeway to discipline any type of speech that they might not agree with or might not be something that they would want to hear. And that's entirely different than cyberbullying or someone being harassed. Interestingly enough, one of the lower courts actually made it very clear that schools can discipline students for harassment and bullying and things like that. But the school's actually asking for more, basically asking for a blank check of being able to discipline any type of speech that they don't agree with, that they can deem to be disruptive. And the question is whether or not that's okay. And I think everyone here would agree that it's not, that schools should have very specific carve-outs of what they can discipline, and we should be able to use our voice off campus, online, on social media, to show any disapproval that we have with the school, whether it may or may not be disruptive to the school day.
Thank you so much for that perspective. And yes, that's a super important point that the third district really did leave school districts with the power to punish speech that is harassing or discriminating against people. It's really important. And the fact that they were not satisfied with that and continue to appeal is really important and forces us to question, what do they really want here? Is it the power to just unchecked punish people? That's something that we should definitely be critical of. So thank you for bringing that up. Another question that we have is for Mary Beth. What's one piece of advice that you'd give student activists that are just beginning to speak out?
I would say to get strength from each other. There is power in numbers, and also that it's some days, I mean, it's a good way of life. You don't always win, but it's a good way of life to join up with others, to speak up about meaningful, important things that affect your lives. And some days it's even fun, and it should be fun some days for you. And also, I think it's really important for you to take care of yourselves also, and to nurture yourselves and do things that are good for you. You know, eat some healthy food, drink some juice, take a walk, call a friend, take a rest, you know, play some music, whatever it is that helps you to take care of yourselves, because there's a lot of stress in the world and a lot of negativity that we're up against. We're trying to create a vision. We have a vision of a better way of doing things, a better world, a more egalitarian world that's good for the earth and all its creatures. And so as part of that, we need to also take care of ourselves while we're doing that, and each other.
Yes, I love that. Self-care is absolutely so important and not emphasized enough in organizing spaces. So we really appreciate that you're uplifting that. Another question that we have is, this can go for anyone, I guess. Depending on the outcome of this case, what do you think the next steps should be for the youth rights movement, especially if we get a ruling that's in favor of the school district?
Well, I'll start. I think no matter what happens, whether it is a favorable or an unfavorable ruling, awareness and publicity and organizing is always the key next step. If it's a favorable ruling, if it's one that comes out in favor of Brandy Levy saying, no, there's a protected zone that schools cannot invade and that people cannot be punished for their off-campus complaints, or very importantly, compelled to sign away all their rights in exchange for an extracurricular activity, which is another thing the school district is asking to be able to do in this case, then I would publicize the heck out of that and make sure that people know that they shouldn't sign those broad constitutional right waivers. If it comes out adversely to Brandy Levy and in favor of the school district, then roll up your sleeves and do what Mary Beth Tinker would do. Organize, organize, organize. She mentioned the New Voices movement, which has been passing state laws around the country to reverse the worst impact of the 1988 Hazelwood case. So there's a roadmap there. It's entirely possible to go knocking on those doors state by state and to get state protections that give you back what the Supreme Court has taken away in federal law. So I think that's the answer. The answer is going to be organized and publicized no matter what happens. I should say, by the way, this case is on a very fast track. We know for a fact that it will be decided by the end of June because that's when the Supreme Court term ends. So this is the very last day of arguments at the Supreme Court. So this is kind of like cramming for your finals. They have got to get this case in by the time that they all go home on June the 30th. So we're going to get an answer very quickly.
Thank you for that perspective, Frank. We really appreciate it. And I think one other question that we have that I think can kind of wrap us up maybe is that, do you think that there is something that student activism accomplishes in cases like these that traditional methods of legal strategy may leave out? Frank, this might be a good one for you or Sarah.
Yeah, so I think the most important thing about the briefs from other student organizations is to make sure that the justices understand the high stakes here beyond just this one student and her one snapshot ran. There is a temptation, I think, to devalue this speech, to think that this is very low value speech. The student didn't get punished especially severely. So what's the big deal here? Why don't we just decide this in favor of the school and take a hands-off approach to minor, insignificant disciplinary disputes? But there's nothing minor or insignificant about the First Amendment rights of young people. And so that's what these briefs, I think, have served to accomplish, is to broaden the perspective, to zoom back that lens for the justices to realize that, wow, when we make this decision, we may be depriving not just high school students, but college students as well, of a lot of their freedoms to engage on the social and political issues that they care about.
Absolutely. And I think that is a great note for us to kind of wrap up on and talk a bit about what students are able to do to get involved and stay involved here. So thank you everybody so much for your great insights. And thank you everybody watching for providing questions and engaging with us. So very similar to what was just shared, really uplifting that point that we're going to be deprived of certain rights that are absolutely necessary for student activism is something that we absolutely want to uplift. So in that spirit, our team has put together a few key action items that everyone listening in can take to get engaged with this case. So although the Supreme Court might see itself as insulated, they're obviously not, and we know the power of public opinion. We know the power and the importance of awareness. So right now, one of the greatest things that we're all able to do is educate each other, share tweets, share articles, op-eds on this case with as many people in your networks as possible to get people talking about it, and use the hashtag #SaveStudentSpeech, not to plug ourselves here, but we'd love if you'd stay engaged there. There's an immense power in putting the school district on notice and letting the public, the justices, their clerks, everybody that is watching here, all of these different stakeholders, letting them know that young people are listening, young people are watching, and we're not just sitting here complacently waiting for our rights to be stripped away to take action. So our ask for all of you is, now that you've been informed, now that you've sat through this whole teaching and heard from so many beautiful, inspirational speakers, keep this conversation going. Don't let it stop here. Help other young folks get informed and make them see why this case is so, so critical to our future. Everyone watching, please join us in sharing why you're defending your First Amendment rights with the hashtag #SaveStudentSpeech. Share a personal story, an anecdote, a reason, anything you can think of. And also currently posted, I think, on all of our Instagram stories. So feel free to go to Student Voice or HISD StuCon on Instagram. There's a story graphic that you can use to share your own student speech stories. So tag your friends, encourage them to share their own stories, and keep people talking. Reach out to your high school teachers and make sure that they're speaking to their students about this case. I know that I learned about Tinker v. Des Moines in high school gov, so why not this? Why not right now? Anything you can do to keep this conversation going, please, please stay engaged. Complacency is so dangerous, and our silence is so dangerous. We really urge you to participate. Blow up this hashtag. I know I'm going to be tweeting it right now. We're at such a critical moment, like we've all said. History is being made right before our eyes, and we all have the chance to be a part of it. And really just fight for all of the causes that we care so deeply about, because it's so much bigger than just this one case. So thank you all for taking the time to be here tonight. Everyone watching, please stay involved. I cannot emphasize that enough. We can't wait to hear and read your stories. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here with all of you, and we hope you all have a good night. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. It was great to be with all of you. Thank you.